I'm not trying to prove anything with this theory, and I quite honestly don't expect to convince anyone, but this is merely a post in the spirit of theory crafting. There will be a lot of speculation, and connections that seem like arbitrary leaps, but if you make it to the end, you will see why every blind leap I make has a reason for being that way. Secondly, this will be an extremely long post, almost quite literally an essay on One Piece. I will attempt to break it up into sections, but due to the insanely lengthy, complex, and interrelated story that Oda has created, any theory of everything will necessarily be very, very long. It's at about 5,000 words plus right now. I'm going for a chronological format, although there will naturally have to be cross-references to both the future and the past, scattered throughout. Many of the ideas in here are almost certainly wrong, but again, if you make it to the end, you will see that certain core assumptions that I built this theory upon seem to make sense, regardless of the many potential variations. Lastly, if you like anything you read here, and it inspires thoughts, ideas, speculations, or theories of your own, I cannot encourage you enough to share these in the comments. One Piece truly is the greatest story ever penned by a human, and I only hope to share my speculations in the spirit of theory crafting. I do warn, this part 1 might sound extreme, but as I attempt to explain more clearly in the introduction, the starting point of any theory of everything, that includes all facts and facets of the story as we know it, will sound bizarre when going all the way back. I'll rapidly continue with parts 2, 3, and perhaps 4, all will be made clear. In the beginning, there was God, the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Long, long ago, Earth was a paradise, and on this paradise, were the twin, ancient gods, the sea, and the sky. Onto Earth was placed the oldest being in the world, the ancient world tree Yggdrasil, was the largest, most powerful living thing to ever exist. The tree was so colossally titanic, that its massive root base formed a supercontinent, a Pangaea of sort. Yggdrasil was in fact, so massive, that its roots extended into and throughout the Earth itself, and emerged from the opposite end of the planet to form an identical world tree. These two supercontinents were the land masses of the world, and as such, there was a single, huge sea, the all-blue. As well as these, there was a single human, the Buddha. Many mythical creatures also dwelt in paradise, including, but not limited to, the dragon, nine-tails, phoenix, Nu, and Hydra. There was only a single one of each of these, and they were immensely wise and powerful. After these, were the sky and sea kings. Although they took many shapes, they were always titanic in size, and are supremely ancient and wise, and I believe the oldest living creatures in the world. Along with all these, were the many sea, land, and sky life of the world. As an explanatory side note, I would classify Zunsha as a sky king. These creatures were so titanically tall and large, that their bodies were lost to sight in the misty clouds that cling to them. There were also many races of living beings that did not reside in this Eden. As well as the extraneous, bizarre aliens that we see in the Enel cover story, we learn that there were three main races that existed on the moon long ago, the Birkans, Skypians, and the Shandians. These were, in essence, the devils, angels, and humans of the One Piece world, and were forbidden to enter Eden. In creating all living beings, God placed within them a life force that would provide their strength, and encapsulate their existence. This was spirit. Spirit is synonymous with soul, haki, ryo, mantra, will. It is the fire blood that burns within all life. The more spirit a living being has, the more powerful it was, and the more it could manipulate its external environment as it saw fit. Yggdrasil was the first of these beings to exist, and it was charged with a crucial function. When any life within the boundaries of paradise died, their departing soul would be reincarnated into another being of the same species. In this way, the net spirit, soul, within earth would never change, but simply be transformed through the ages. The sea and the sky were the first two gods to exist after Yggdrasil, and as such, were extensions of the world tree itself, much in the same way that Enlil's lightning devil fruit allowed his observation Haki to extend much further. The sea was the lifeblood of earth itself, and as such, Yggdrasil's power was much more pervasive throughout the ocean than it was otherwise. In a way, Yggdrasil itself can see all of the world, and know the state of the entirety of its being at any time, and throughout all time. In rewatching the anime, I even came to notice this map, and the many versions similar to it, that appear multiple times in the One Piece openings and closings. It may sound like a reach, but is this not a literal map of Pangaea as I'm describing it? Naturally, the three sentient, moon-dwelling races grew envious of the paradise they had been eternally deprived of, and strove for their own mastery over life. They advanced their technology further and further, until they had total knowledge, and power over the physical laws of nature, such as gravity. They had even discovered Norans, that's right, long-ring land making a comeback, a form of elementary particle that slowed everything it touched, without detracting from its mass or energy. They had mastered surgical prowess to such a degree, they were capable of keeping themselves perpetually youthful, and had learned the deep intricacies of the lineage factor, DNA, of living beings, and utilized the function of electricity in their creations. They had created entire cities that utilized this power, capable of independent function, and which they used to create legions of automata to perform their physical, laborious tasks for them. God had used his spirit to shape the entire world, and they were virtually the bottom of the cosmic barrel. In lieu of this, they performed the first sin of the universe. Dissatisfied, they had attempted to become like God. They pushed their scientific knowledge until they had finally discovered how to break down reality into its most pure form, spirit. Using this unpredictable and unstable substance, they were able to perform non-literal miracles of science. They could distill anything, whether it be an object, weapon, creature, emotion, food, element, or even fundamental force, down to its most basic essence. Finally, they had the power of God within reach of their fingertips. However, in their pursuit of knowledge and power, they had devastated the moon, and depleted it of every natural resource. Finally, and fatefully, they used their automata to create a titanic ark to carry them to the paradise that waited below. Interestingly, I have come to very closely examine the key panels that provide the basis for this origin story of the world, the two panels showing the moon people's history. As you can see, the initial sphere that the people are in appears quite a bit larger, and different, to the one appearing in the second panel, which the moon people are leaving. My currently working interpretation is this. The moon people in their city within the moon, constructing their automata, with the sun blazing overhead, and one Shandayan, human, standing at the edge, peering outwards. I believe that he is observing a Shandayan that is fleeing to the earth, as you can see the slightest edge of a face in the bottom left of the panel. This Shandayan is who caused the cataclysm, and he wanted to get to earth before anyone else from the moon, to claim godhood for himself, and all the fabled power within the earth's boundaries. He fled to the earth with the huge fire blood deposit, and ended up crash landing. Depleted of resources, and giving chase, the moon people left in the ark for earth, and in the second panel, we can see that they, too, were forced to jump ship before the ark crashed, as we can see the automata being left behind on the second, larger sphere, while the moon people descend to the visible sea below using balloons, the same method used to return to the moon earlier in the cover story. How close is this moon, and atop some much smaller, simple craft. This voyage to Earth ended in what I have simply come to call the cataclysm. This will be hard to put into words, so bear with me. Something went wrong, and the ark of the moon races crashed straight into the Earth. The ark smashed straight into one of the world trees, and a monolithic explosion occurred, resulting in an unprecedented event that would change the world forever. The immense destructive energy of this explosion shattered the Pangaea below, and the immense storage of pure spirit, for convenience, I will call this fire blood, until I show that it already has a name, was shunted into the earth, traveling deep throughout Yggdrasil's world roots, and traveled directly through the planet, erupting mightily out the opposite end, and likewise fracturing the antipodal Pangaea. While these opposing, cataclysmic shocks caused the supercontinents to shatter, the significant bulk of these land masses was shunted outward in a circular shock wave, slamming into each other, and forming what would come to be known as the Red Line. Fragments were otherwise scattered to form a plethora of islands. This enormous event killed almost every living thing on Earth. The sea and sky gods were killed, as their most heavy essence, in the forms of Poseidon and Uranus, oft dwelt at the base of the trunk of the world trees, often sitting in contemplation beside Buddha. I say killed, because although their forms perished, it was not singularly due to the destructive power of the devastation, but rather that they were so close to the epic entree of this event, that they were broken down / distilled by the enormous volume of fire blood that encased them. All of the mythical creatures were killed, as being so ancient and wise, they too liked to dwell amongst the gods at the navel of this paradise, even the mighty phoenix, which was wiped out so fast that it was unable to regenerate. Much of the land and sea life was wiped out, although some of the sky and sea kings were naturally deep underwater, or distant enough from the cataclysms that they were able to survive the damage. Yggdrasil had been somewhat destroyed by this cataclysm, although it did not exist in its original state. Yggdrasil was able to survive by being wrenched into two separate trees. These were the treasure tree Adam, and the sunlight tree Eve. Eve, in extreme anguish, unable to contain the massive influx of surging souls and sheer volume of distilled essences, performed one final, desperate action. Each of the souls of the invading races were seen as devils, and as such, were denied the natural reincarnation. Each one of these souls was paired with a segmented essence that had been broken down in the cataclysm, and shunted into one of the hundreds of fruits sprouted from its branches. Different elements, substances, weapons, foods, clothing, items, emotions, concepts, species, and races were all individually broken down. However, the power of the sea prevented this from occurring to anything below the ocean, or rather, Yggdrasil was largely able to properly reincarnate these essences and lineage factors, not completely, as we shall see. Eve, the tree at the point of initial impact, sprouted hundreds of these fruit, each containing the distilled essence and soul of the invading devils, in order to not be overwhelmed. These fruit would come to be known as the devil fruits, so aptly named, as whoever ate one would be instilled with fantastic and unique power, at the cost of being cursed by the sea. Unbeknownst to those who ate them, those who ate a devil fruit had become a container for a cursed soul, and thus they themselves had allied with the devil. As such, Yggdrasil, in its surviving forms, would use its limited power to rob those devils of their strength, and although their bestowed powers would still work, they were doomed to be as rocks in the sea, and drown. As well as this, the devil fruit alter the lineage factor of those who consume them, So perhaps the Birkins themselves had some hydrophobic properties that are transferred to the consumer. With a single bite, the entrapped soul and power would enter the individual, but if they were to eat more than one devil fruit, they would explode. Although the shadow of an individual could hold one additional soul, there would be no place for the third, and their bodies would shatter from the sheer strain of attempting to contain this. Bluno gives more hints later. Skipping over to the other side of the planet, the treasure tree atom had been created. Over time, the greater bulk of the tree would come to appear rather unchanged, simply a massive tree. However, the wood from this tree came to be incredibly strengthened, and atom wood, as it came to be known, would be an incredibly rare and expensive resource, as any ship, structure, or craft created from it would be immune from cannon fire, gunfire, and the greater bulk of destructive influences. The surviving Birkins, Skypians, and Shadayans were abhorred with the destruction they had caused, and thus came to dwell atop the Sky Islands, following an archaic societal structure, wherein God would be their ruler, and where they could live in relative peace and simplicity. The first Birkin, however, who had made it down to the Blue Sea as they called it, had discovered the wild, bizarre, and forever changed world they had created. Sea kings roamed, making sea travel incredibly difficult. Giants and dwarves had been created in the cataclysm, and went forth to populate and migrate themselves. The fish of the sea, and the beasts of the land, had all had their lineage factors irreversibly shuffled, resulting in another two new races, the fishmen, and the minks, who went on to likewise propagate and proliferate throughout the world. Whenever they had children, these children's lineage factor was not altogether influenced by their parents. They could be a completely different kind of fishman or mink than their parents were. These species were also quite naturally strong, being given the best form that Yggdrasil could manage for them, and as always, the world tree would give its inherent occupants the greatest advantage possible. This Birkin, or perhaps his successors, was the original creator of the royal palace of Alabasta, a structure that predates the country of Alabasta itself by thousands of years. Around the time of the cataclysm, another aspect of Yggdrasil ended up on a lonely island, the Tree of Knowledge. This island and tree, which takes up almost the entire island, just like Yggdrasil itself had, would come to be inhabited by humans like most others, and would come to be an archaeology island, O'Hara, where the collective knowledge of these passing thousands of years could be collected and studied. As time passed, more and more of the world came to be inhabited, with some islands remaining completely untouched. Little Garden is still in the prehistoric-like state of the cataclysm, while others formed huge kingdoms that reigned for centuries. However, as the peoples of the world got more and more connected, there would emerge a single, great kingdom, in which dwelt every race, creed, nationality, and peoples, and this ancient kingdom as it would come to be known, was the focal point of technology, knowledge, power, combat, and spirit. This was the ancient kingdom, one country. Like with many names and events, the Romanization of this name would come to be skewed and distorted throughout history, and the country came to be known simply as Wano country. This great kingdom was originally placed roughly where Wano country is today, roughly at the location of the treasure tree atom, which is now largely positioned on Elbaf, and as such, was incredibly beautiful and protected, appearing similar to Zo today. Here, every species and race could live together in blissful peace, where information, knowledge, culture, and combat were shared amongst all. This kingdom was built around a huge volcano, a volcano that still exists in Wano to this day, and within this volcano, was an incredibly huge deposit of fire blood. As the original arc of the fleeing Birkin had shot through the entire planet, it had created an island of bizarre geography, where the volcano itself was the epic entree of the subsequent piercing of the surface, and around it had blossomed a raised bowl of land, from which flowed a seemingly unending waterfall. Why does the waterfall surrounding Wano never stop? Where does the water come from, when gravity should forbid such an upward flow? Well, the site that I propose is dipolar to Wano, is known in the current day as an ice lobby, the Nevernight Island. Why is the sun always shining at an ice lobby? Why does water seem to flow forever into the gigantic hole in the ocean/earth there, without it filling? Because this water is flowing through the earth, and out of Wano. As well as this, I believe that one country potentially had the capability of electrical power. Many of the Birkins and Skypians had independently chosen to descend to the Blue Sea, and with them, the reverse engineering of the scraps, remnants, and ruins of the crashed arcs was possible. Back to the fire blood deposit in the Wano volcano, this is where it gets interesting. You see, this fire blood is not a fictitious substance of my own creation, but it already exists in the story of One Piece as we know it. In fact, it already has a name, and its mechanics have been esoterically explained to us. This is the random, forgettable substance known as pyrobloin. In Skypiea, it is explained to us how sky islands and sky seas are created. Massive, undersea volcanic eruptions spew magma, seawater, chunks of earth. If, as is the case with Jaya, there happens to be some above the spot, and pyrobloin into the sky. This pyrobloin combines with the sea and the island fragments, along with the sky into which it is launched, to make Sky Island, and also combines with the sea to make Sky Ocean. The density concentration of pyrobloin determines what condenses into what, and how much. This is, I believe, how sea stone is made. Pyrobloin is taken and forged with the sea to create a chunk of iron-like stone called Karoski, which, in the exact words of Smoker, emanates the same wavelength as the sea itself. This is why sea stone robs devil fruit users of their power. Through it, the wavelength of Yggdrasil's will is able to emanate, and enact the same strength-draining properties. With this pyrobloin, the craftsmen and engineers of one country were able to create a sophisticated and unprecedented society of abundance, harmony, and peace. However, as mankind expanded and explored this fantastic, weird, and new world, they eventually stumbled upon another aspect of Yggdrasil that had been created in the cataclysm, the sunlight tree Eve. From Eve's branches sprouted many fruit, the devil fruit. These were first consumed, and the bizarre powers they provided were discovered. It is interesting to note that although the kingdom, or at least, the country, of Alabasta had existed for at least 500 years prior to the Void Century, the royal palace of Aliaverna has existed for at least 4,000 years. When looking at the architecture of this palace, I could not help but note that it appeared very similar to that of the palace of Merigielse, the soon-to-be capital of the world government. This palace, coincidentally enough, is called Pangaea Castle. I believe that this was one of the first kingdoms established by man, and although it has stood fast for many thousands of years since, its original creators and inhabitants seemed content to cast it aside, and allow kingdoms and kings to fight over both it and the country's ownership for millennia. The ruler of the kingdom that had created this palace, I suspect, was that first, fleeing Shandayan, who would come to call himself I will divert a little from the chronology of the world to explain my theoretical understanding of the mechanics of what came to be known as hacking. First of all, I absolutely believe that Odin knew the extensive workings of Haki from the beginning. Mantra has often been dismissed as an early concept of Haki, but with the recent Wano art, we can see that the isolated, unchanged society also had its own name for Haki, that of Ryo. Mantra was not an early idea, it is what the Birken and Scythian cultures call Haki. Haki, Mantra, Ryo, Spirit, Soul, Will, and Fire Blood are all one and the same. Pyro plus Bloin equals fire plus blood equals burning blood. When one pushes their will and their spirit to the limit, they can achieve a level of strength that allows this Haki within them to be manifested, and this develops in two different ways, observation, and armament. Armament Haki has been called an invisible coat of armor, and likewise, the Tekai that CP9 use in NICE lobby has been confirmed to be Haki, and is not a simple early idea of the like. By now, the whole 5 years to write claim by Oda should start becoming an apparent obfuscation, intended to make all of these hints and key pieces of information blurry and unconnectable. When armament Haki advances, this manifests as a literal blackening of one, and while this was early on dismissed as simply a visual aid, it has become clear that this happens literally within the story, if the proficiency of the user's armament Haki is sufficient enough. With Wano, we have been shown advanced armament, the ability to project one's own Haki outside of their body, allowing for immense destructive capabilities, as the object or being that is subject to this is destroyed from the inside out. As well as this, observation Haki allows for the perception of things not normally perceivable. This can extend from simple advanced visual acuity, to being able to perceive one's surroundings, including the presence of life forms, to a supernatural degree. It allows for one to read an opponent, to discern their next attack or move, and subsequently avoid it. Mantra, once again, is, in hindsight, an incredible display of observation Haki. However, Enel is quite unique amongst characters, as he, I believe intentionally, ate a devil fruit that synergizes with this power, along the electric currents and wavelengths in the air. His observation Haki can extend to cover an entire island, allowing him to hear conversations taking place miles away. In Whole Cake Island, we were introduced via Katakuri to the next level of this. Advanced observation Haki allows one to not only read an opponent well enough to discern their next movement, but quite literally allows one to see slightly into the future. Is it not impressive, then, that Enel predicts how many fighters will be left after 3 hours of battle? With his prediction of 5, not including himself, he appears to arguably have the most disgustingly strong observation Haki in the series to date. However, he is wrong, as Luffy was trapped in the belly of the giant snake, through which we assume he was unable to discern Luffy's presence. As well as these, there is a third, incredibly rare level of Haki, one that cannot be attained to, but that one needs to be born with, as only one in several million people are. This is known as Supreme Ruler type Haki, or Conqueror's Haki. One who has this is said to have the qualities of a king, capable of standing and ruling above all others, and it has been widely speculated what an advanced color of the Conqueror would look like. In a way, though, we have already seen it. When Shanks visits Whitebeard, to warn him of Teach, we see the Moby Dick crack beneath his feet. When he and Whitebeard clash, the very sky above them is rent asunder. When Kaido and Linlin similarly clash, we see a similar, seemingly even larger version of this effect. As well, when we see Roger and Newgate clash in flashback, their blades do not even touch, and clash in mid-air, with a gigantic burst of air pressure launching the surrounding onlookers away. Advanced Conqueror's Haki, then, I propose is simply this, as well as dominating the will of others. When pushed to the absolute pinnacles of potential strength, it allows one's very will to dominate the world, or in other words, it is will made manifest. With armament projecting outwards, and observation projecting forwards, those with the disposition of a king can dominate the reality around them, their very determination and will being driven to bend the sky and sea and spirit within all things to their desire. Whether it be physical pressure to strengthen a blow, and create titanic, turbulent air pressure bursts, or simply knock out those who are sufficiently weaker, if one has a disposition close enough to God Himself, it will allow one to bend fate and luck to their very aid. Or, roughly as my hawk puts it in Marineford, to sway others ever to your side. As all spirit, and thus Haki, has come from and is substantially identical to God, all of reality becomes a playground for a cosmic king. Luffy, however, does not simply have the disposition of a king. Luffy is the most pure, innocent, and free spirit in the world, and as such, has the disposition of God Himself. As all things are substantially created by spirit, there is a pinnacle of advanced color of the conqueror that extremely few people, even amongst conqueror users themselves, are capable of reaching. This is to hear the voice of all things is simply that, the soulful, spiritual, esoteric wavelength of harmonic being that all things emanate, and through this, one is able to hear the thoughts of beings so powerful, they are not even capable of normal speech, such as sea kings. As well as this, one is able to read the poneglyphs with this power, as one can hear their very message or tale without having to physically read them. In Alabasta, Zoro learns how to cut steel, and is able to dodge a huge amount of falling rubble by hearing or otherwise feeling the breath of all things. I don't believe, once again, that this is an early idea of the voice of all things. Instead, I believe that Zoro, through his abandonment of materialistic desires, hedonism, and anything but pure and beautiful discipline and training, was able to get somewhat of a glimpse at this universal harmony. He was able not to hear the voice, but just to feel the breath of all things. I think it is important, as well, that he learns how not to cut things. He is able to slash the leaves of a tree without harming or damaging them in any way at all, and learned, perhaps not cognitively or literally, of the middle way. Awakening sounds similar to enlightenment, kind of like the Buddha thing I was talking about earlier, huh? Anyway, Devil Fruit Awakening is explained by Doflamingo to be the next level of Devil Fruit power, when one can push the strength of their fruit, and the depth of their understanding of it to the highest level, one can achieve awakening, the ability to project your fruit's powers outside of your own body. This is demonstrated by Daffy turning various buildings, structures, and even the ground into strings, as is his fruit's capability. If that sounds familiar, it's because it mirrors the Advanced Conqueror's Haki line that I theorized about, and this is where it becomes truly apparent just how intertwined Haki and Devil Fruit really are, when the wavelength of your Devil Fruit power, and the wavelength of your soul, your Haki, your spirit, and will itself overlap completely with the very thing that sets your blood on fire, you can achieve awakening, and the will of both yourself, and your Devil Fruit, will be able to be projected outside of your body, to manipulate the very nature of the world itself. Now already, I may have misled you, you do not need Conqueror's Haki to use awakening, but the way that fate and luck works simply lends itself to this, as those who have the disposition of a king, are naturally those who have a very strong spirit, and thus very strong Haki, and a very focused will, and the more one is in tune with their spirit, and their desires, and their way of being, the more they will be the sort to push their fruit power to its limit in order to achieve that will, and be that king. People speculate what Luffy's awakening will look like, but I truly posit that he has already started learning it, and as is his usual tendency, he did so without knowing it, before Daffy informs us of the mysterious power of awakening, Luffy uses his Python attack, in which his arm is now able to simply keep stretching, and pursue a target until it strikes. Daffy is surprised by this attack, confused by its continuing progression instead of ending, and although it is a combination of his armament and his rubber body that allows this to happen, many people have asked the question, but why did it bounce on the air? I propose that Doflamingo gives us the answer immediately after, and perhaps is even bemusedly reminded of it because he knows Luffy doesn't even know he's using it. Awakening. When Luffy fights Katakuri, however, we are once again given a visual puzzle that seems to have no real answer. How did he spawn Machi in mid-air? Of course, by this point, we could arguably posit awakening as a simple explanation. He just used awakening to turn the air into Machi, in a way. However, I think that there is an arguable difference between converting one's own body into, using one's own body to produce, and using awakening to convert the environment or produce via the environment one's devil fruit power, and actually producing or converting thin air itself into that devil fruit power. And again, I believe that Advanced Conqueror's Haki is the potential additional factor, in that it is essentially one's will made manifest. When that will, when the wavelength of that soul and the soul power of the devil fruit are truly, harmoniously, pushed to their very limits, awakening allows the pushing of all of that spirit into the physical world. In Sabayati, we are told by Rayleigh that Haki is strengthened in the fire of combat, and this is very fundamental. From the very start, Luffy and his crew, in the words of Zoro at an ice lobby, have been getting stronger without even realizing it, island after island, as they continue to fight bigger, and stronger foes. Once Haki is introduced, the power scaling of One Piece should make a lot more sense. How does Luffy get so much stronger between Water 7, and defeating Lucci? For the same reason he is going to be strong enough to put up a decent fight against Kaido. Again, I am getting ahead of myself, but the examples make the concept appear more clearly. Take Luffy vs Doflamingo as another example. Although it seems comical that he be carried around by the frenzied citizens for 10 minutes while his Haki recharges, it is essential, so that he can get that little bit stronger, enough to win. Against Katakuri, a seemingly insurmountable force, this is taken to the next level, with literal hours spent fighting, resting, eating, and fighting again, until he is literally capable of learning advanced observation within the fight. This is why the power scaling has been difficult to pin down at times. The strength of one's disposition determines how fast they can get stronger. With the purely theoretical explanation of Haki aside, hopefully what I've said and what I will now say will be making a lot more sense to you. And again, although I completely acknowledge that a lot of all this is speculative, I hope it is beginning to be clear how all of it inevitably comes to tie in together, within the confines of this theory. Well, if you've made it this far, hopefully you'll continue the journey in part 2 and 3, and probably 4, coming ASAP. Till then, peace.